Welcome back to The Deep Dive. Today we're cracking open a stack of source material that is, I think, a real psychological map of human complexity.
It really is.
It's a masterclass in the long, messy evolution of relationships, longing, and regret.
Mhm.
We're not dealing with some grand adventure story here. We're dealing with the quiet, intricate, emotional lives unfolding in what seems like a pretty unremarkable setting in coastal Maine.
That's exactly right. And our mission today is really to synthesize these character studies to understand how longing, trauma, and accommodation, and that's a key word, accommodation,
Right.
that constant, just exhausting effort to adjust, how that shapes a person's resilience and, their long-term connections.
And we're mostly focusing on two people, Henry and Olive Kitteridge.
Primarily, yes. They seem ordinary on the surface, but their inner worlds are just governed by these immense emotional currents. You have crippling guilt, multi-generational trauma, and this continuous effort to achieve or just maintain a really fragile sense of contentment.
And we'll dig into Henry's lifelong burden of being the peacekeeper and how that interacts with Olive's much more volatile but also surprisingly vulnerable nature.
Exactly.
So our goal is to uncover let's call it the emotional architecture of this community. How do these people build their lives around secrets, around necessary accommodations, and I think this paralyzing fear of feeling too much, or maybe even worse, feeling too little?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. We need to understand the infrastructure they create just to survive, decades of marriage, raising kids, and facing their own mortality.
And to do that, we have to start with the pillar of self-denial and stability, the man who just desperately wanted the world to spin smoothly. Henry Kitteridge, the pharmacist. So Henry Kitteridge, he's introduced to us not just as a businessman, but really as the community's designated peacekeeper.
That's the perfect term for him.
And the sources make it so clear that his core motivation, this desire to keep everyone around him content, it's not just, him being a nice guy. It's rooted in this profound childhood trauma.
It is. It comes from him witnessing his mother's nervous breakdowns twice during his youth. And these experiences left him with what the source material calls quiet trepidations.
And that phrase, quiet trepidations, that feels like the key to unlocking Henry, doesn't it?
It's everything. It suggests this low-grade, constant anxiety. Because his external world was so volatile and unpredictable as a child, his own mother collapsing, he internalized this responsibility to guarantee emotional stability for everyone else.
So it's not just a preference for calm, it's actually a survival mechanism.
It's a full-blown survival mechanism. He believes that if he can just manage the surface emotions of his customers, of his family, then he can prevent those deeper catastrophic ruptures that he saw as a kid.
And we see this play out almost clinically in his pharmacy. He's running a business, dealing with these very practical, everyday transactions, but his attention is always somewhere else.
It's always hovering. Exactly.
Right.
He's managing medications on one level, but what he's really managing is human disappointment, human irritation. The text notes, he keeps half an ear open to intervene. If a customer is distressed over, say, a minor price change, or is irritated by the quality of a cheap Ace bandage, or a crummy ice pack.
The small stuff.
The small stuff. Henry steps in immediately to smooth it over. He just cannot tolerate conflict or distress.
And we get this great contrast in his employee, Mrs. Granger.
Oh, she's a complete inverse of Henry. She carries what's described as the cold breeze of the open water because her husband's a lobster fisherman, and she is not so eager to please.
She has this natural distance, a kind of hardened coastal realism that Henry just completely lacks.
He watches her, and you get the sense he almost recognizes in her a strength to withstand the discomfort that he's always trying to fix. In fact, when she dies in her sleep, Henry sees it as a personal failure.
He does. He thinks he missed a symptom he could have fixed.
It's totally irrational, but it's so revealing. This sense of responsibility he feels extends even to mortality itself.
It really shows the immense weight of this emotional architecture he's built for himself. And crucially, this professional vigilance, it's a direct parallel to his home life.
It has to be. He can't turn it off. The source describes his attention as constantly hovering at home to prevent Olive from bearing down too hard on their son, Christopher.
Whether it's over a forgotten homework assignment or a chore done badly.
Exactly. So Henry is playing husband, father, and emotional buffer all at once. He's always inserting himself between the volatile force, which is Olive, and the delicate recipient, Christopher.
And this peacekeeping, it prevents true confrontation, but what it fosters is this very shallow, very fragile domestic peace.
And sometimes the burden of maintaining that superficial peace just leads to this intense, almost desperate need for some kind of external light, for youthful connection.
This is what prompts that spontaneous dinner invitation.
Yeah. He's standing in the parking lot at the end of a late summer day, and he feels completely depleted by the emotional labor of his day. He just experiences this intense longing to be in the presence of young people.
People whose lives have been crushed yet by years and years of accommodation.
Exactly. He sees Denise and Henry Thibodeau, their faces are turned to him, and they show this diffident but eager interest. And that's all it takes. That's enough to fuel this impulsive invitation for supper. He's not seeking them out romantically or sexually. He's seeking hope transference.
Hope transference. I like that. So how does Olive react to Henry bringing this element of, outside hope and disruption into their very guarded home?
Well, she reacts with her characteristic dryness and a bit of theatricality. She's wiping sweat, she's ripping up onion grass. She's the very picture of domestic exhaustion and impatience.
And she says to him,
She says, "Then that's that, Mr. President. Give your order to the cook." It's an acceptance, but it comes with a verbal knife thrust, By calling him Mr. President, she just immediately undercuts his sense of authority. She frames the invitation not as this warm, spontaneous gesture, but as a dictatorial decree he expects her to carry out.
She accepts, but she makes sure he knows the cost is her own additional labor.
Absolutely. And this really sets the stage for Henry's much more complex emotional entanglement with Denise, who he hires not long after.
Right. So he hires Denise, and he immediately starts to catalog her, not just her skills, but her vulnerability.
Totally. She is neat as a pin, if plain as a plate. And when she answers the phone, she sounds like a girl playing grown-up. She is clearly fragile, but she provides him with a specific kind of emotional nourishment that Olive just can't or won't.
Which seems to be vulnerability without any confrontation.
That's it, exactly. Denise offers these little spurts of talkativeness about really intimate, troubling family details. Her mother's MS, the rejection by her former Protestant boyfriend's parents because she was Catholic.
And Henry just observes her. He tries to psychoanalyze her inability to embrace happiness.
Yeah, like her saying that finding potatoes for $1 a bag was too good to be true. He wonders if her distrust of joy comes from her mother's illness or, and this is a great line, the Catholic tendency to feel guilty about everything.
He loves her guilelessness and the purity of her dreams. These are qualities that were probably eroded in his marriage to Olive a long, long time ago.
For sure. But here's where Henry's emotional architecture gets really contradictory and fascinating. He never acts on this desire for Denise.
No. In fact, the source tells us her reticence fuels a new wave of power for Olive. He's intensely drawn back to his wife, but specifically to her most volatile, aggressive features.
This is a brilliant piece of psychological mapping in the text. Henry doesn't fall in love with the vulnerable, compliant woman. He uses that emotional tension to reaffirm his powerful, stormy bond with Olive. The forbidden nature of Denise provides this charge of erotic energy that he redirects right back into his marriage.
And it says he's drawn to her sharp opinions, her full breasts, her stormy moods, and sudden deep laughter.
Exactly. And he connects this redirection of desire to something really primal.
He does.
In these moments of great passion for Olive, he feels a flash of incredible frenzy, as though in the act of loving his wife, he was joined with all men in loving the world of women, who contained the dark, mossy secret of the earth deep within them.
That is a massive, almost mythic emotional projection onto Olive.
And it's fueled, at least in part, by his guilt and tension about Denise.
Yeah.
It's a mechanism for sustaining the marriage through conflict, where the conflict itself becomes the sustaining force.
And if we look at Henry's shame, we see exactly why he needs that kind of mythic projection. He is constantly measuring himself against an ideal of masculinity he feels he can never meet, which is captured so perfectly in that little anecdote about football.
It's a small moment, but it's just devastating in what it reveals about his inner life versus his public persona. Young Henry Thibodeau comes into the store, and he's excitedly talking about his college football days.
Describing the sheer joy of it.
Yeah, hearing the people yelling from the stands, seeing that pass come right at you and knowing you're going to catch it, it's a description of pure, unbridled, masculine confidence.
And what does Henry Kitteridge reveal in response?
The complete opposite. He confesses he felt intense fear at every single game, that he was bad at it, and he was actually relieved when his grades slipped and he had to quit.
It's a total admission of internal failure. He failed to meet that societal standard of aggressive physical engagement.
And then to twist the knife, Denise, with the shy pride, shares that the cheerleaders had a specific cheer just for her, Henry. Let's go, Thibodeau, let's go.
The gulf between those two men in that moment is just astronomical.
It is. Henry Kitteridge, the respected pharmacist, is secretly defined by his quiet trepidation and shame over feeling fear, while this younger man was cheered on for his sheer, simple, athletic enthusiasm.
It just underscores Henry's realization that he's fundamentally built differently.
He lacks the aggression, the competitiveness, the joy in public exertion, and this realization forces him even further into his controlled world of peacekeeping and accommodation. Because he can't control the football field, but he can control the pharmacy and, he hopes, the emotional temperature of his own home.
So Henry's entire existence is built on suppressing his own fear and channeling his desire for stability outward, demanding the state of contentment from everyone around him.
Yes.
So let's pivot now to the force that constantly tests that equilibrium, Olive Kitteridge.
If Henry is the mechanism of accommodation, Olive is the mechanism of truth.
That's good.
She's the disruptor. She's the one who refuses to pretend that things are just content. And her sharp exterior is deployed immediately, both as a defense and as a tool of judgment.
We see that right away through her critique of Denise, Henry's fragile new employee. It's this almost obsessive focus on the details of her presentation.
Yes. When Olive reads Denise's thank you note, she critiques the small, neat handwriting, saying it's just as cautious as she is.
And then she moves on to her clothes.
Right to the aesthetic. She questions why Denise, with her pale coloring, would choose to wear gray and beige. The colors themselves become a symbol of Denise's timid, cautious life, which Olive automatically judges as weak.
So she uses her cutting intellect to create this emotional distance from anyone she sees as too fragile or too compliant.
She's projecting her own fear of weakness onto them. But this aggressively sharp exterior, it's concealing these immense long-term burdens, which leads to one of the most volatile moments in the source material, the great explosion of the sick and tired.
The catalyst for this is so subtle, but it's explosive.
It is. Henry, who's driven by his fear of the public exposure of familial failure, he demands that Olive go with him to church. He puts the whole weight of his persona on this one small request. He asks, is it too much to ask? A man's wife accompanying him to church.
And what follows is a complete dismantling of their entire marital structure.
Olive's fury's door is flung open. This is not a controlled argument. It is a release of decades of repressed resentment. She just catalogs this immense, unacknowledged burden of her life.
The teaching, the foolish meetings where the goddamn principal is a moron.
The endless cycle of shopping, cooking, ironing, laundry, and critically, doing Christopher's homework. A burden she carries because Henry is too concerned with peacekeeping to ever step in decisively.
And she strips Henry of his identity in that moment, too.
Completely. She calls him Mr. Head Deacon Claptrap Nice Guy. That insult just hits Henry right at his core. It attacks the very persona he built to manage his quiet trepidations. And the tirade, it doesn't end in more screaming. It ends with this cold, definitive finality.
Yeah.
He says, well, I'm sick and tired of it. Sick to death.
It's an admission that the accommodation they've built is just fundamentally unsustainable for her soul.
Absolutely. But beneath this outward fury, the source material explores her deep, unspoken sorrow and fears, particularly around mortality and spirituality.
Henry really struggles with the reality of her being an unapologetic atheist, doesn't he?
Profoundly. His fear of losing her is all tied up with his own loss of comfort in the church. He notices the congregation is dwindling. He feels the absence of any divine presence. He's terrified that when she dies, there will be nothing left, and he'll be utterly alone.
Which is such a huge distance from their early life when they shared a sense of wonder.
A huge distance. They used to marvel together at the miraculous creation of the respiratory system in their college biology class. He sees her atheism as a source of strength, though. He has these glimpses of horror at her potential death, yet he still perceives that women are far braver than men, using Daisy Foster's resilience after loss as his proof.
And the sources confirm that Olive has been carrying these private sorrows, a legacy of suicide and a hidden love for decades, completely outside of Henry's awareness.
Right. First, there's the trauma of suicide. When their son, Christopher, as an adult, mentions he sometimes thinks about just ending it all, it echoes the suicide of Olive's own father, 39 years earlier.
And the text shows her immediate internalized guilt over how she handled that past trauma.
She responded to her father so lightly, saying, "Oh, Father, we all have times when we feel blue." And that generational echo of despair is just terrifying for her.
And then there's the other, Jim O'Casey.
Her teaching colleague, yes. Henry finally realizes, years and years later, that Olive had loved Jim O'Casey, had possibly been loved by him. After Jim died in a car crash, Olive spent weeks in bed, sobbing harshly into a pillow.
And Henry was completely unaware of the real reason for her distress.
Utterly unaware, she saw this profound kinship with Jim that Henry, in his desire for contentment, could never provide. She privately felt they were both cut from the same piece of bad cloth. A shared self-identification defined by wariness and quiet anger, which was the total opposite of Henry's gentle innocence.
That concept, being cut from bad cloth, is so crucial. It speaks to her hidden, turbulent emotional architecture that Henry's gentle nature was constantly undermining. And this hidden rage, it manifests years later during Christopher's wedding to Suzanne Bernstein, MD, PhD.
Dr. Sue.
Dr. Sue. This is her great public act of disruption.
Olive sees Dr. Sue as everything she despises. Positive, pushy, and someone she judges as mean as a bat from hell.
She represents the perfect, successful replacement for Olive in Christopher's life.
And after she overhears Suzanne talking seriously about being new in-laws, Olive feels her territory is being invaded. So she instinctively performs this act of psychological warfare to regain control.
The act itself is so specific and so wonderfully petty, we have to discuss the three elements of the crime.
It is a beautifully choreographed piece of emotional vandalism. First, she goes for the intimate. She steals Suzanne's slippery, lacy, colorful, pale blue bra and shoves it into her handbag.
An act of stealing femininity and intimacy.
Exactly. Second, she takes a black magic marker and draws this definitive line across a neatly folded beige sweater. And the beige color is interesting. It mirrors her earlier critique of Denise's blandness. It's a defilement of order.
And the third item.
One scuffed loafer. A shoe Suzanne wears all the time. This is the piece de resistance of passive aggression. She ensures the shoes won't match, creating this daily, nagging physical imbalance and mental confusion for Suzanne.
So what's the psychological goal here? It can't just be spite.
No, the motive is much more profound. The source says she seeks relief from the solitary burden of what she's done. By creating this chaos, she's transferring the feeling of her inner turmoil onto Suzanne.
She wants Suzanne to doubt herself.
Yes. She's hoping the perfect Dr. Sue will start wondering, I must be losing my mind, I can't keep track of anything. Olive, who lives in a constant state of internal turbulence, finds relief in externalizing chaos and making the victim feel that same internal fracture.
She is forcing her own inner bad cloth onto someone else. We are witnessing the immense cost of her life's accommodations. They demand a release valve, and that valve is disruptive, petty chaos.
And shifting back to Henry, we see the immediate failure of his own internal architecture when Henry Thibodeau dies. Henry's relationship with the young widow, Denise, becomes the mechanism through which he manages his own guilt and unfulfilled longing.
Denise is just plunged into complete helplessness. She literally cannot function in the world Henry inhabits.
No, she can't drive. She's never written a check. So Henry steps in to fill that void of competency.
And he finds a genuine connection in this new role. He takes her to these back dirt roads to teach her to drive.
The car bucked like a wild horse. But that shared physical experience and the small, nervous giggle from Denise, it allows Henry to feel useful and connected in a way his adult life rarely permits. It's an innocent intimacy founded on dependency and competence.
And the emotional climax of their connection happens when she visits him, distraught after running over the cat he had given her, Slippers.
She's devastated, crying, and she lets her guard down completely. She confesses, I talk to you in my head all the time.
Which is a devastating line. It confirms that Henry has achieved the connection he longed for. He exists fully in someone else's inner world, even if they're just in thought.
And Henry responds by giving her a Valium and tucking her into bed like a child, smoothing her hair.
This moment forces Henry to confront the fantasy. He drives home imagining running away, moving upstate, having a little girl with Denise who would adore him. The daughter Olive never really was to him.
But the external reality, the architecture of his life, is just too rigid.
Right. He recognizes the insurmountable constraints. Divorce from Olive is as unthinkable as sawing off his leg.
And Denise, given her Catholicism, would never truly want a divorced Protestant. So the relationship is an impossible daydream. When Jerry proposes to Denise, Henry, exercising that peacekeeping instinct, tells her simply to go. He forces the end.
But the sources reveal the true, profound nature of Henry's emotional mechanism years later. We realize that the guilt didn't punish him, it actually sustained him.
This is a remarkable psychological insight. Henry realizes that his years of feeling guilty about Denise have carried with them the kernel of still having her. Guilt became his preferred form of retention.
So by maintaining that low-grade guilt, he kept her perpetually alive in his emotional architecture.
It prevented the emotional vacuum, the deflated feeling that would come from acknowledging her true, complete departure and his own failure to act on his desire.
So he chose a functional pain, the guilt, over a debilitating reality, which was the loss.
Precisely. It's a mechanism of self-preservation, but also self-deception. He pushes the thought away. He calls it ludicrous, because who could bear to think of himself this way as a man deflated by the good fortune of others?
His peacekeeping extends even to his internal accounting. He has to avoid the shame of realizing his life only felt full when he was engaging in this guilt-ridden fantasy.
It's a dark mirror, in a way, to the absolute destruction we see in Kevin Coulson, a man whose life is defined entirely by trauma.
Kevin Poulsen, who is training in psychiatry, is driven by the horror of his mother's suicide.
An act which left remnants of corporeality across the kitchen cupboards. I mean, the violence of that act informs his entire adult quest for answers. He seeks a tangible, clinical understanding. He's studying PET scans, looking for neurological correlates like the enlargement of the amygdala and the bipolar.
He's desperately trying to reduce his mother's suffering to a physical pathology he could somehow fix.
But his pursuit of answers only leads to profound despair, where he frames hope itself as a kind of disease.
He says hope is a cancer inside him.
Because hope implies expectation. And expectation leads to crushing disappointment, which was the ultimate outcome of his mother's life. He internalizes this philosophical pressure to connect, remembering his university president's saccharine graduation speech. To love and be loved is the most important thing in life, which only caused him an inward fear that grew and spread.
He understands the critical dictum of Freud. We must love or we grow ill, yet he finds himself paralyzed.
He's paralyzed by both the expectation of love and the trauma of loss, which brings him to the bay with a rifle wrapped in a blanket, intending to end his life.
But he is found by Olive Kitteridge. How does her unexpected presence interrupt that spiral?
Well, Olive's presence is grounding, because she is a memory of respect, of order, of a time when the world made a certain kind of sense. She recognizes him instantly. Kevin Coulson, when she calmly sits in his car, he tries to start the engine, but the sheer weight of his seventh-grade teacher, the woman who demanded excellence, it holds him back.
And then the redirection of the crisis. This chance encounter with Patty Howe.
Olive spots Patty near a steep drop, realizes she's in danger, and moves faster than he would have thought possible. She physically tries to save Patty from the swirling tide. And Kevin, despite being immersed in his own death wish seconds before, instinctively joins the rescue.
And the physical act of saving another human life gives him this momentary, powerful realization.
Yes. While he's holding on to Patty, he notes her fierceness that matched the power of the ocean, and he has this profound external realization. Look how she wanted to live. Look how she wanted to hold on. It's an immediate physical displacement of his inner focus on death.
The fight for life in another person, a life he was instrumental in saving, gives him an unexpected, temporary reprieve from his own mental hell.
It does. And this theme of using physical or creative action to accommodate deep pain, it continues with Angie O'Mara, the pianist.
Her coping mechanism is meticulous and self-destructive.
Angie is crippled by severe stage fright. Her accommodation involves this strict, damaging ritual. She starts swallowing vodka at 5 p.m. every single day before her shift at the warehouse.
And this is purely to gain the confidence she needs to perform.
Purely. And critically, she plays for 3 hours straight. She avoids the break because she fears the moment of quiet and the attention before the first note, that responsibility of changing the atmosphere in the room. Her music is her psychological bunker. She loves slipping inside the music where she doesn't have to be seen as herself.
And this careful routine is shattered when her former boyfriend, Simon, reappears and exposes all her insecurities.
Simon, now a real estate lawyer in Boston, revisits the bar. He had broken up with her because he felt he had to date both you and your mother, which suggests this crippling level of emotional enmeshment. He had previously labeled her as neurotic and wounded.
And during this visit, he delivers a really cruel blow. He tells her he has pitied her for years.
That accusation of pity is meant to just wound her self-worth completely. But the source allows Angie to find resilience by recognizing Simon's own disappointed life.
She achieves clarity through the music.
Yes. She realizes Simon is a fundamentally disappointed man who wanted to be a concert pianist himself, but settled for real estate law. His pity for her is revealed to be a form of self-soothing, a thin milk nourishment he sought by witnessing her reduced life.
By recognizing his failure, she understands that his judgment is fundamentally flawed and irrelevant to her own artistic integrity.
It's a powerful reclaiming of her personal architecture. Her music is her space, and she plays We Shall Overcome twice, slowly, grandly, realizing his judgment can't change the fact that he's still married to a woman who did not ever find you lovely in bed. She realizes her life, for all its chaos, is emotionally richer than his carefully curated, disappointment-fueled mediocrity.
The need for this emotional architecture, defined by secrets and accommodations, it isn't unique to Henry and Olive, is it? We see it so clearly in the lives of their peers.
Oh, this is where the sources really broaden their scope on marital dynamics. I mean, they take Harmon and Bonnie. After their sons leave home, the entire architecture of their marriage just collapses.
The sources describe the boys leaving as fixing a leak in the house. But when that distraction of raising children is gone, the emptiness is just revealed.
Precisely. Bonnie, who's relieved of the continual confusion of motherhood, she gains this new energy. She joins clubs, she starts selling braided rugs. Harmon, who relied on the routine and the presence of his children, is completely bewildered by this change.
And the fracture becomes complete when Bonnie quietly and definitively ends their physical intimacy.
She tells him, I think I'm just done with that stuff. And Harmon is devastated. He feels this horrible blank knowledge that she means it. And he asks, pathetically, if it's because he's gotten fat.
The fact that she ends it so casually, I'm just done, it suggests that for her, the marriage was just a functional accommodation for raising children. And now that phase is complete.
And Harmon's subsequent search for solace shows his need to redefine that lost intimacy in a way that protects his own self-image and marital architecture. He finds these non-tender shared moments with Daisy Foster.
And he reframes this relationship internally. He calls it a shared interest, like bird watching.
Exactly. He believes it's not cheating because it lacks passion or turning him away from Bonnie. Daisy is the central heating of his life, just a functional warmth to offset the coldness he now feels from his wife.
He's still seeking that youthful, uncomplicated hope that Henry Kitteridge craved, isn't he? He recalls the unqualified comfortableness of a young couple at the marina.
It's that desire for unblemished potential. But the sources immediately undermine this romantic ideal by revealing that same young couple were later arrested for drug possession.
The juxtaposition is vital. Even in youth, the promise of unburdened comfort is often just an illusion.
And Harmon's life becomes a series of compartmentalized compromises. He relies on the predictable kindness of Daisy to manage the cold rejection from Bonnie.
Now let's look at the Hiltons, Jane and Bob, whose marriage faces a crisis that is devastating specifically because of the timing.
Right. Jane saw her late-in-life marriage as a lovely dessert, thinking of every good moment as a gift. That framework suggests this fragile, guarded optimism. She cherishes the present because she knows their time is limited.
But she lives with the constant acute fear of dying in public, especially after a mild heart attack.
And that sense of security, built on this appreciation for borrowed time, is utterly destroyed by Bob's secret.
The Miami secret. A profound, long-held betrayal revealed at the worst possible moment.
Bob is forced to admit he visited an old flame in Miami who was battling breast cancer. His justification is so meek, he felt bad, and she wanted me to. The betrayal is deep, but the true devastation comes from Jane's realization about how their age has compressed time.
The urgency of mortality makes the betrayal exponentially worse. How does she articulate that crushing concept of time?
She states with devastating clarity, at our age, it's like turning a couple of quick pages. Blip. Shock of the betrayal, the familiar anguish. It feels too great because they are running out of time for their hearts to handle such emotional stress.
For a younger couple, the betrayal could lead to years of recovery. For them, it might cost them their final years of peace.
The emotional architecture they built to provide comfort in old age is revealed to be rotten just when they needed it most. They simply lack the emotional recovery time.
What's fascinating about all these aging couples, the Kitteridges, the Harmons, the Holtons, is that the emotional architecture holds up only as long as they stick to the initial contract.
However unspoken or unhealthy it was.
Right. The moment one partner, like Bonnie or Bob, introduces a shocking new reality, the entire structure is revealed to be built on sand.
It almost makes Henry's peacekeeping effort seem a little more rational, doesn't it? If any ripple can bring down the house, maybe absolute vigilance is the only way to manage.
It is the only way to manage if you believe, as Henry does, that true contentment is achievable through control. But as we move into the final sections of the sources, we see that the most profound connections are found when that architecture collapses entirely.
The structural collapse of the Kitteridge's life really begins with a hospital hostage situation.
An event that completely strips away Henry's carefully constructed veneer of competency and stability.
They're held hostage by these young, frightened gunmen, pig face and blue mask, while Olive is just being checked for crab meat poisoning. The experience is terrifying because it's a sudden, violent intrusion of chaotic reality into Henry's ordered world.
And Henry, in his peacekeeping mode, tries desperately to reassert control. He says, "Do you think you could find a blanket for my wife?"
A feeble attempt to inject domestic comfort into a scene of terror. And he's immediately shut down with the brutal simplicity of, "Shut the fuck up."
His control is just instantly nullified. And Olive's observation of the situation is incredibly telling.
She sees the humanity behind the masks. She's struck by how young and terrified Blue Mask is. She notes his severely bitten fingernails, the nervous bouncing of his knees.
While Henry is paralyzed by fear and shame, his pants are wet. Olive, however, is absorbing the terror and the desperate youthfulness of their attackers.
And that fear and shame are immediately translated into internal family warfare.
Yes. Later, during a fight with Christopher, Olive screams, and Christopher responds with this impenetrable, self-protective calm that Olive immediately perceives as a form of cruelty.
She links Christopher's indifference to the indifferent security woman or the smiling Pakistani vendor in New York who would smile and watch me walk to get on, a subway he knew would blow up. For Olive, this calm, detached indifference, this refusal to acknowledge or share pain, is the most terrifying form of cruelty.
And after the hostage situation, Henry delivers his quiet, devastating final accusation against Olive.
Henry, broken by his failure to protect her and maybe by the realization that his entire life was a performance of control, he quietly states, "In all the years we've been married, all the years, I don't believe you've ever once apologized for anything."
And that's the core truth of their relationship. Olive's refusal to apologize, to accommodate guilt, is the source of both her strength and her destructive rage.
It exposes the asymmetry of their emotional contract. Henry always accommodated her. She never accommodated him.
So after Henry dies, Olive is squeezed to death by an unendurable sense of loneliness. She stops seeking contentment and instead begins searching for shared despair.
Which leads her to Louise Larkin.
And this shift is crucial. Olive no longer seeks a Henry-type connection. She seeks someone who confirms the difficulty of simply existing.
Exactly. Louise's son was involved in the hospital incident. Olive visits Louise, who reveals a literal accommodation of emotional distance in her marriage. Roger lives upstairs and I live downstairs. It's a perfect visual representation of emotional divorce.
And Louise speaks so serenely about suicide, validating Olive's own dark thoughts.
Louise's calm resignation. It would solve everything. It doesn't shock Olive. It confirms her belief that life is primarily about managing the unbearable. Louise's isolation, the sheer reality of two people living completely separate lives within one house, validates Olive's belief that true contentment is a lie. The reality is that everyone is just struggling to manage the chaos.
This search for fellow sufferers culminates in her profound, raw, and often volatile relationship with Jack Kennison.
Olive encounters Jack Kennison, a Harvard-educated man whose life has completely collapsed after his wife's death in December. He is literally collapsed on the river path.
And he's resistant to leaving. He begs her, "Don't leave me alone."
And Olive recognizes the depth of his suffering. She doesn't offer false comfort. She meets his despair head-on, saying simply, "Then you're in hell." And he replies, "Then I'm in hell."
That shared, immediate recognition of their existential situation, they don't need to explain their grief, they just confirm it. That's a powerful foundation. They bond over shared brokenness.
It is the ultimate anti-Henry connection. There's no pretense of peacekeeping or contentment. There is just the raw, gaping loneliness they both inhabit.
However, even this nascent connection is challenged by Olive's deep ingrained passions and prejudices.
This is where the political schism enters, which is wonderfully human and almost derails their entire relationship.
Their connection is almost instantly challenged when Olive learns Jack is a Republican and voted for the president she despises.
And Olive, whose passions run deep, is enraged. She lashes out. She calls him Mr. Harvard, Mr. Brains for voting for that stinker. She proudly proclaims herself as essentially a peasant with strong passions and prejudices of a peasant.
And Jack good-naturedly throws the phrase right back at her. "My God, you do have the passions and the prejudices of a peasant."
For Olive, This confrontation reveals that high-minded Harvard sophistication and low-level peasantry amount to the same thing when they involve a closed-off ideological judgment.
Mm.
She is ready to cut him off entirely over politics.
But she doesn't.
She doesn't. This is the triumph of the connection. The shared geography of loneliness is stronger than the ideology. Despite the massive political and class schism, Olive visits Jack at his home. He's lying in bed, vulnerable, aging, his stomach bulging like a sack of sunflower seeds. She stands there observing the quiet, knowing that the world's silence folds over her with a shiver of ghastliness.
And the final act is one of profound silent accommodation.
The source tells us that to sit down beside him would be to close her eyes to the gaping loneliness of the sunlit world, that unvarnished, terrifying reality of human isolation. Yet she remains. She's drawn to the shared, unpolished brokenness. She accepts that they are both in hell, but they can be in hell together.
The emotional architecture of her life, which began as fierce isolation, ends in shared, acknowledged vulnerability. It's a beautifully quiet conclusion that suggests the true meaning of resilience isn't in conquering loneliness, but in allowing someone else to witness it. Hashtag outro.
When we look back at the entire architecture of these lives, what the sources demonstrate most powerfully is that human resilience is rarely about achieving Henry's idealized notion of contentment.
Or overcoming sorrow.
Exactly. Instead, life is an exhausting, lifelong process of accommodation. Whether it was Henry accommodating all his rage for decades, or Bonnie accommodating Harmon's need for domestic stability until she just couldn't anymore, or Olive finally accommodating her own crushing loneliness by seeking out the company of fellow sufferers like Louise and Jack.
Life is just an endless series of adjustments to things that fundamentally don't make sense.
That's it.
And we've witnessed characters finding their deepest, most enduring connections not in shared joy or perfection, but in shared brokenness and fear. That quiet trepidation we saw in Henry, or the fierce volatility in Olive. The biggest cost of striving for that superficial normalcy, for Henry's definition of contentment, is the resulting isolation and the fear of ever being transparent about your inner chaos.
The architecture of pretense ultimately collapses. And this leaves us with a final thought rooted in Olive's own profound late-life reflection on mortality and human capability. She looked at the difficult, messy lives around her, and she concluded, people manage. She is not so sure. The tide is still out on that one, she thinks.
So what deep personal currents in your own emotional architecture are you currently trying to accommodate? Maybe through guilt or denial or peacekeeping.
And is it possible that showing your own gaping loneliness, that messy, unpolished reality, is actually the greatest, most necessary path to genuine, lasting connection? Now that we've unpacked that, what will you do with the knowledge?